Welcome to the Ask HR podcast, the podcast dedicated to being your trusted resource, answering your HR questions while covering broader topics in people and culture. I'm your host, Yusin Pato-Young. Join me every week with our special guests as we share our stories, learn from each other, and empower one another. Ask HR is proudly sponsored by YP Personnel Management and Consulting, a strategic, tactical, and practical HR solutions consulting firm. We are your resources at work. Now let's get started. Thank you for continuing to send in your Ask HR questions. This week's question, we are addressing the negative workplace dynamic. It's too common you hear employees say they're leaving their jobs because of a toxic work environment. But to get to that point, it doesn't happen overnight. So how can you spot some of the signs? In our discussion, we're going to walk through identifying a toxic workplace, the red flags to look for, how can you manage through and maintain your sanity with confidence, and honestly, why should you have to? Some best practices to consider, and how HR can support employees in these situations. Disclaimer, a toxic work environment looks different for everyone. Whether it's workplace bullying, excessive micromanaging, or just a negative workplace, you and I as employees should know the signs and seek support early. For this discussion, we're going to focus on well-being and career growth. How you can tell if you're in a toxic work environment. First, it's not just about the bad days. It's the repetitive behavior or work situations that impacts the overall morale and or our individual mental health. For example, and wrote some down. When gossip and bullying or personal attacks becomes a routine, micromanagement with unrealistic expectation or lack of autonomy, favoritism, exclusion, experiencing unequal treatment, lack of inclusivity, or even biased leadership, lack of respect, a culture that doesn't take into account employee contribution. Now, a dismissive manager or a rude coworker are also red flags, but truth be told, that is everywhere and just about everything that we do, unfortunately, and not just at work. Consider these best practices. Trust your instincts. If it feels unhealthy, it probably is. Recognize patterns. A one-time conflict is not like, oh my God, toxic. It's the repetitive behaviors that are the concerns. Does leadership tolerate and encourage negative behaviors? Here's where HR can support you and I through policy enforcement. We already earned the name policy enforcer, so let's put it to practice. Make sure your employees not only know of the anti-harassment, the code of conduct, and respect in the workplace policies, but let's enforce it. Anonymous reporting channels, providing a safe way to report the toxic concerns without fear of retaliation, and training, practicing workplace civility. In 2024, the Society for Human Resources Management launched the initiative Civility at Work to address the growing concerns of workplace incivility. Their research highlights that millions of acts of incivility happens daily, significantly impacting employee well-being and organizational success. It's not surprising, but it is a great initiative. Don't take my word for it. Refer to SHRM, and they also now have an updated civility starter kit with lots of tools and strategies. We'll also share the link in the episode description. So far, we've talked about identifying the signs or red flags of a toxic workplace. Now, let's look at managing through a toxic environment, though we shouldn't have to. However, if you're dealing with workplace toxicity, taking proactive steps will not only protect your well-being, but also keep you on your work track and also your career trajectory. Start with setting boundaries. You are not being forced to take part in the gossip and the toxic behaviors. So, firmly decline participating and engaging in any toxic behavior. You know how to say it best for you. Always try to be and remain professional. Unprofessional behaviors can sometimes work against you. Seek out your HR team for support early and or tap into your employee assistant program if it's applicable to your situation. Let's say the company culture is good, but your team is toxic. HR is available to help you identify other opportunities internally beyond the EAP resources, like coaching you, the employee, and the people leaders with mediation, intervention, or other cultural improvement strategies. Finally, if nothing improves, consider your individual situation. Ask yourself, has HR or leadership taken steps to overall improve the culture? Do you feel valued and or respected in your role? If the answer is no, consider whether your job now aligns with your long-term value. Dealing and working in a negative work environment is challenging, but you don't have to face it alone. We all deserve a healthy workplace. And that wraps up this week's Ask HR. Thank you for tuning in. Support our show by subscribing, following, and engaging with us. Send in your HR questions to askhr@yppmc.com and listen to us now on Spotify and all major podcast platforms.